Chapter 2. Plato's Cave. I'm caught in a trap, and I can't walk out. Quote, "We can say that we are not born in the world. We are born into something that we transform into a world." Michael Talbot. One of the most familiar ancient stories modern spiritual seekers are aware of is that of Plato's cave. Found in the book Republic, it is a discussion between Plato's teacher Socrates and Plato's brother Glaucon. In this discussion, Socrates describes reality using the metaphor of a cave. What so many spiritual seekers fail to recognize is that this allegory is only a half explanation of anything, and it is actually more important to examine all that Plato excludes rather than what he includes. That this metaphor is held in such high reverence while presenting so little is telling in itself. Was there an original longer version, as I suspect, that in time had been edited down by the powers that be to what we have now? As I will explain, this is a story about the cave, not about exiting the cave, which can make it seem like one story, freedom, but it's really about another, continued bondage. The conversation in the Republic begins with Socrates asking Glaucon to imagine a cave inhabited by prisoners chained and held in place since childhood. Not only are they chained to their seats, but their heads are held in place in such a way that they can only see the wall directly in front of them. The story has a giant fire behind the prisoners, with a walkway in front of the fire where people and animals pass to cast shadows on the cave wall. Sounds are echoed off the cave walls to make it seem like they are the sounds of the shadow objects. When the prisoners see the shadows, they believe they are actual living beings. The first problem that arises with this account is that no one is asking the fundamental questions. Who are these prisoners? Where do they come from? Why have they become prisoners? And why have they been sent to this cave and not to a prisoner of war camp or a jail? Certainly the analogy is hinting that the prisoners are us. Not only must we figure out how the children of this analogy became prisoners, but we must ask ourselves clearly, how did we become prisoners? Prisoners from what or where? Another question missing is who are the beings in control of this deception? What are they gaining from doing it? Why go through all the trouble of making the ramp, the fire, the shadow objects, and then spend all day working to fool some prisoners? Why are they expending so much effort? Again, this is not even hinted at. These may seem like small omissions, but once you contemplate further, you see that they are important omissions that might not be accident, as the allegory might have been created to trick us. The prisoners are focused on the cave wall, not on actual reality, while the reader is focused on trusting the story and not checking if the allegory they are reading is some type of deception. As this book goes along, I hope I will be able to bring insight into the missing pieces of Plato's cave. The way Socrates discusses how the shadows on the wall are produced and projected make the cave an almost perfect representation of a modern movie theater. The cave wall is the screen, the objects are the movie, the fire is the projection light, and the echoing sounds are the movie speakers. However, instead of just one large screen in front of the theater, it would be better to imagine that the shadow images are projected onto a 360-degree screen. In other words, an experience which surrounds the prisoners in all directions, including up and down. As Socrates suggests, the images and sounds would be believed as being fully real because those are the only sights and sounds the prisoners have ever seen. Socrates then makes an interesting suggestion. What if a prisoner was somehow freed from the chains and could stand up? He or she would be very confused. The shadows on the wall had been the only reality, not the cave, the other prisoners, or the shadow-making devices he or she is now seen. Another question that should be answered is, why does the prisoner stand up? This is another glaring omission. Plato's story only suggests that the chains are not actually locked and anyone can stand up whenever they want. But if that is the case, why do so few prisoners stand? Any answer as to why this one prisoner did stand up is purely personal speculation, and I have a few myself. Perhaps no one will stand up until something in the shadow movie becomes so painful that they scream and force themselves to turn away. Or perhaps it is a force that can be called grace or luck. Either way, it is another point to the analogy that is missing. Why did the prisoners stand up? The question of why the prisoners' chains are not locked might give us a clue. They are not locked because they agreed to become prisoners. I will mention in many places later in this book that it seems like the beings who run the Matrix need our agreement for us to enter here. They cannot force us, but have to trick and deceive us with fraudulent fine print contracts and emotional tricks to get us to say yes. The prisoners in Plato's cave likely agreed to come into the cave and be prisoners. This is why a prisoner can in effect stand up whenever they wish. They just have to revoke and end their original agreement. They're not out yet, but now they have the possibility of exiting as the binds that brought them in are severed. Most will just create new binds, or did create new binds in the course of living, but those too can be revoked and ended. The story claims that the chained prisoners have some sort of interaction among themselves. This was inferred through the story's suggestion of contests on who could give the best description of the last appearing shadow, or who could guess what shadow was coming next. Thus, the newly standing prisoner, somewhat confused, might start talking to the person sitting beside them about this new cave theater that they see. The seated prisoner might just tell them to stop acting stupid and get back to reality. And some may well do that. They might sit back down immediately and get re-involved in the movie. The few moments where they stood up might soon be forgotten. This could be more common than we realize. However, a few, even though likely afraid at this stage, might be more curious or angry. Those feelings could be strong enough to override the fear directing them to sit down. As a result, they might decide instead to take a tour of the cave theater to inspect it. The movies The Truman Show, starring Jim Carrey, and Pleasantville, starring Tobey Maguire and Reese Witherspoon, add a couple of nice metaphors, for they were clearly influenced by the Plato's cave analogy. The name of the town Truman lives is Sea Haven, whose motto is a nice place to live, sounding heavenly. The same with the name Pleasantville, which also sounds heavenly. In each town, reality was constructed to be presented as perfect. In Pleasantville's case, it was done through the conditioned values presented by 1950s television, where everyone smiled and never missed a bowling pin or a basketball shot. Sea Haven is the place designed to make Truman, true man, each person in the dream world, feel comfortable, so he has no interest in wanting to leave. In Truman's case, he is the only reality, and everything else is a show put on just for him. Actors playing roles, and doing so to see how Truman responds. Just the same as the shadow beings projected onto Plato's cave wall to keep the prisoner's attention focused forward. Both worlds are designed to not have the people there ever think about wanting to leave. The one who oversees Truman's world is named Christoph, and in his reviews he is likened to God. However, when you listen closely to his words, he is more like the egoic mind. Christoph is always in the control room, the moon, watching Truman's world, constantly devising things to frighten him, or present the idea of limitations. Christoph does state that all the power, though, is with Truman. Quote, "We accept the reality of the world with which we are presented. If his was more than just a vague ambition, if he was absolutely determined to find out the truth of his world, there is no way we could prevent him." However, this concept has more significance when digging into cave metaphor movies such as Dark City, They Live, and the TV shows Lost and Westworld. These and several others will be examined later in the book. One thing the analogy is hinting at is that we are living our life under a series of lies. One of the biggest lies being fed to us is how all that is going on here is God's plan, as if everything just happens and somehow is all done for us and is in God's hands. On one level, most can see a type of control or direction in place beyond our control. We have all sorts of names for this force: destiny, déjà vu, premonition. Yet no one is asking who is the director of this force of destiny, and who is the beneficiary of this setup. I have come to see that it is not a benevolent force, as religion, the New Age, Advaita, or shamanism all suggest, but a malevolent force, like the Cathars and Gnostics suggest. It does not take much to see that a realm full of suffering and anguish would not help a loving creator. It helps a malevolent force. A good way to keep people from seeing this is to present a loving creator as a non-logical answer for why so many terrible things happen. A loving deity makes you suffer to improve you, torture you to make you better, as Richard Rose would say it. People are given traumatic misfortunes, then they come to believe that they were a part of a loving God's plan, and then they pray to the very same God that just traumatized them, asking to end their suffering. We are nothing more than farm animals, kept for energetic food, loosh, and this has been going on for thousands of years. If there really was a happy, loving deity in charge of this place, it could, of course, be a much more peaceful experience. However, we live in a physical and energetic slaughterhouse. You are living, in many ways, as a computer game character or a semi-programmed robot in a very insane system. How many worms have just died in the last 5 seconds to feed all the birds? How many mice died to feed all the cats? Does a worm scream when it is being eaten? What set up such an insane and sick system? The Demiurge, that's who. The one also called Rex Mundi, the devil, Satan, or Jehovah in the Old Testament. That is the real creator of all of this simulated reality. This presence can also be called it. Can you now see why the computer realm in our world is called IT? It is an extension of the original artificial intelligence, the Demiurge, that is in charge of the simulation. We have to see that all of us have been dealing with an abusive creator deity since long before we were born, and only when the creator of this realm is seen, as the Cathars and Gnostics did, as a psychopathic, insane AI construct, can anything about our experiences finally begin to make sense. We have been deceived in the astral realm, the pre-birth realm, and in the material realm, and perhaps for hundreds or thousands of lifetimes. Only by seeing things honestly can there really be the chance to leave Plato's cave. As long as someone keeps saying, it's all in God's hands, you have turned your life over to the Demiurge. As a metaphor, Truman is being manipulated daily by everyone he comes across, including his wife and best friend. Sylvia, his love interest, was the exception, and we will get to her shortly. Truman is us. Christoph is presented as if he loves Truman, and this is why he is manipulating and messing with his life. Christoph is manipulating Truman to control him. It seems like at the end of the movie, where Truman sails away, battles the storm, reaches the edge of the bubble, bursts it, and then waves goodbye, that he is leaving Plato's cave. But again, we have to see honestly that what Truman is doing is leaving one matrix, Sea Haven, to soon enter the next matrix of Los Angeles and Sylvia. Although more real than where he was initially, was how quickly will he settle into this new world, believing this next layer to be the final one. This is the same mistake Neo makes in the first Matrix movie. Quote, "The very gods we pray to for hope and salvation are the very culprits that prey on us. They are our keepers, and they enslave us, yet we are convinced that they are our creator and savior. Isn't that ironic?" Greg Carlisle. Stop turning over your will with every prayer to a being outside yourself you have no idea who or what it is. Stop saying thy will be done, and start saying my deepest self's will be done. If that self comes from a loving creator, bonus. But at least all of your direction will come from what is most deeply you. Leaving Plato's cave is all about learning to put your trust within yourself and nothing outside of yourself. You have all the power, and all that is outside of you is attempting to drain or limit that power. There are two disciplines no one wants to spend any time studying: law and history. What is odd about the subject of history is that if you go back far enough, you're no longer studying history, but archaeology. That makes no sense. Both are the study of the past. It does make sense when you realize that you are studying two things. Archaeology, Archonology, is the study of the takeover of this realm by the Demiurge's archons, while history, his story, is the story of the Demiurge after the takeover was completed. History is simply the story of how the Demiurge took the false simulated reality he created, then set up various systems of control within it: commerce, government, science, religion, law, etc., and the wars that were fought to eliminate people who would not go along with the control systems being put in place. Also, it is important to study the legal system. I don't want to get into that depth here, but you can follow the footnotes for an excellent article on this subject.